So I had this idea of expanding my photography skills and going into film and making documentaries. So I thought it would be fun to make documentaries about postcards. Maybe find the spot where they took the picture and do a then and now picture of the postcard. And then I flipped them over on the back and I thought, I could probably figure out who sent the postcard and who received it. That'd be kind of fun too. So I found 3 postcards. I went on YouTube and I made 3 episodes. And I showed them to my wife and my kids and my coworkers, and they said, "That's pretty clever. I'd keep watching that." So here we go. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brian Zellmer. I've been competing in the Wisconsin State Fair for the past 11 years and thought it would be kind of fun to do documentaries about postcards. Not only am I going to try to find the bridge, the lighthouse, and the sign on the front, I thought it would be kind of fun to do a little genealogy research and find who the people are on the back. I hope you can spend some time with me on my next 3-part series. Welcome to the Postcard Pilgrim. It's not winter anymore on the Postcard Pilgrim, so I thought I'd take our next few episodes outside. But before we go any further, let's ask the good Lord for some help. Dear Lord, please help me find the people on the back and the pictures on the front, and let my YouTube channel go crazy. Amen. Alright, our next postcard in this series was written by an Arthur C. Heller to an E.A. Simard.
Many thanks for your pretty card. It was very fine. Hope you will like this one. Arthur C. Heller, 230 West 5th Street, Duluth, Minnesota. E.A. Simard, Stockton, California.
How cool is that? Can't wait to figure out who Arthur C. Heller is. This one's going to be kind of fun. My grandpa on my maternal side, his name was Arthur too. Going on to my favorite resource, Ancestry.com, I found Mr. Heller right away. I knew God has answered my prayers before in the past, but holy buckets, that was really fast. My first hit was on a 1917-1918 World War I draft card, and it had Mr. Heller's signature on it. Our postcard was dated 1907, and the draft for World War I was between 1917 and 1918. So it was 10 years after the postcard was written. But Mr. Heller's signature appears on the draft card and on the postcard, so I was able to compare the two together to see if we had somewhat of a match. Comparing the postcard signature to the draft card signature, to me, they kind of look the same. Granted, they were taken 10 years apart, they still had some similarities for me to get kind of excited. On the draft card, it also lists Mr. Heller's occupation of a bookbinder. On Arthur's World War I draft card, we also find that he was a former soldier and was a sergeant in the Minnesota National Guard. Searching Ancestry again, we find Mr. Heller in 1905 in the Minnesota City Directory for Duluth. In the directory, he's once again listed as a bookbinder at the company he works for, but it's at 1424 Superior. Our biggest help for finding a match for Mr. Heller was his address, 230 West 5th Street, Duluth, Minnesota. In 1915, we find Arthur again in Minnesota in the Duluth City Directory, and we have an exact match. His address is listed as 230 West 5th Street. We hit the jackpot! Now that we have an exact match on Arthur, we can look for him and his family in the Minnesota censuses. Going to 1900, we find Arthur and his whole family listed in the census. Hey, welcome back. Now that we found Mr. Heller and his whole family in 1910, we can look for his whole family prior to the turn of the century instead of looking for just one person. The 1890 census was all but destroyed by fire at the Federal Building in Washington, D.C., but we do find him and his family in 1895. He's 7 years old and listed as living at home. In 1900, we find him and his family again, and now he's 12 years old and listed as a student at school. In 1905, we find his family again, and this time he's 17 years old, and we see him listed as a bookbinder. This gives us an exact match of the bookbinder we found in the city directory when he was older. Unfortunately for Mr. Heller, his mom dies around 1905, and in 1910, we find his father has remarried, and Mr. Heller is now living with his dad, his sister, and his stepfamily. We're now back where we started with Mr. Heller's draft card in 1917. We get his exact birth date of February 6th, 1888, and another interesting note that we see on the draft card is he's missing an index finger. Mr. Heller probably had an industrial accident while he was a bookbinder for the company that he worked for. In 1917, we also find a marriage record, and he marries a nice young lady by the name of Ethel. In 1919, Mr. Heller's father passes away, and we find Art and Ethel in the 1920 census. Ethel and Art's marriage doesn't last either, and we find Ethel remarried to another man in 1930 census. Unfortunately, after 1920, Art Heller kind of disappears. Art does show up again in 1953 when he files for Social Security. In the 1950s, Art Heller's life is still a little bit of a mystery, because we do find a cemetery stone for Art Heller, but it's in Washington National Cemetery in Connecticut. Connecticut's a little further away than Duluth, Minnesota. How we got there, I haven't researched enough to find out. In this postcard, we find that Art had correspondence with an E.A. Simard. E.A. Simard wrote to Art prior to the postcard that we're researching now. So if you have an E.A. Simard postcard to an Arthur Heller, I would be very interested in reading what that postcard has to say. In the research that I did, I don't find that Art Heller had any children, so there's no future generations to give the postcard to from Art Heller. Since we hit a dead end with Mr. Heller, let's move on to E.A. Simard. Hey, welcome back again. Not only did God answer our prayers finding Mr. Heller, but he also answered our prayers finding E.A. Simard right away. Our first hit for E.A. Simard came on a marriage record in 1908 to a Stellar tire. In 1910, we find Mr. Simard again, married to Stella, and he's in O'Neill Township in California. Interesting note that I found is that he's a foreman in a printing office. In 1917, we find Mr. Simard again, and this time we get his full name from a 1917 registration card for the World War I draft. His name is Ernest Albert Simard. On the draft card, we find his occupation as a chief mailing clerk and a telephone or telegraph operator. In 1918, we find Mr. Simard in a city directory in California, and not only is he a clerk and operator of a telephone or telegraph, but he owns his own business. The business is called Simard and Watch. We now find Mr. Simard throughout the turn of the century into the 20s, 30s, and 40s as a successful businessman. Being that Mr. Simard is also in the printing industry, somewhere along the line, Mr. Simard and Mr. Heller must have started correspondence. I believe that this is an exact match of the Mr. Simard from our postcard. But, unfortunately, Mr. Simard has a tragic turn of events. In 1954, Mr. Simard suffers a heart attack and passes away on vacation. I know everyone has a beginning and an end, but that would be kind of tragic if I would die on vacation and my wife would have to get my body back to the States. I really feel for Stella. I'm pretty confident that the E.A. Simard on the postcard is the same E.R. Simard that I found in my research. So if you are related to an E.A. Simard in your family tree, I have a postcard that you might be interested in. Send me an email to support your relation to Mr. Simard, and I would be very happy to send you my postcard as a family heirloom for your collection. Now that I'm pretty confident in finding Art Heller and Mr. Ernest Arthur Simard in my research, I think it's time to take a little road trip to Duluth, Minnesota. Come on! Hey, welcome back. So if you're on the outside thinking, where the heck is Duluth, Minnesota? Let me clue you in a little bit. You first need to know country of origin, state, county, and city. First, we're in the country of the United States of America. In the United States of America, you'll find 50 states. Minnesota is one of those 50 states. In Minnesota, you'll find St. Louis County. In St. Louis County, you'll find the port city of Duluth. In my hometown of Sussex, Duluth is about 382 miles away. So that's about a 6-hour drive. But through the magic of YouTube, we'll only be there in a few minutes. Come on! Sorry, I love that song. I'll turn the radio down a little bit. So the bridge in a postcard is called the Aerial Lift Bridge. It's been around since the beginning of the 1900s, and it's really quite a remarkable feat of engineering. Instead of just having a span across two places and being stationary, the aerial lift bridge lifts straight up in the air to let the ships pass under the bridge to get into the harbor. So you might be thinking to yourself, why would anyone ever want to collect postcards? Well, for me, postcards are kind of a memory trigger of places I've been or have lived in the past. So for me, they're kind of fun to look at and then reminisce about different things and different places I've been. The first 3 postcards I picked related to me, and the next 3 relate to my wife and her life. I thought it would be a good series because my wife is way cooler than I am. Our first stop is going to be at a place called South Pier Inn, and the inn is right next to the aerial lift bridge. It's kind of a pricey place to stay, but the sights there are pretty cool. The aerial lift bridge is like right outside the bedroom window. Very cool. "382 miles and 6 hours in the car later, we're back in Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth, Minnesota is a port town on the Great Lake Superior. Ships traveling on the Great Lake come into the port of Duluth through the canal. The aerial lift bridge spans this canal from mainland Minnesota to a peninsula called Park Point. But you really have to come here and feel the sounds of the bridge to get the full experience. The first sound and feel of the bridge is when you drive across it and you can feel your wheels on the bridge itself. The second sound you feel are the bells when the bridge lifts into the air. The third sound is called the captain's salute. When the ships come into the canal, they salute the bridge by one long shot of the horn, followed by 2 short ones. The bridge crew answers the ship as it passes under the bridge. According to the Minnesota Department of Transportation, the aerial lift bridge was constructed in 1901 to 1905 and then modified in 1929. The original 1901-1905 bridge had a gondola suspended by an inverted steel tower from the underside of the truss. This truss remains extant as a structural member of the bridge. Our 1907 postcard shows a picture of the bridge in the gondola stage of its life. In 1929, the bridge was modified again by adding the elevating roadway. Moving to Minnesota in 1981 and then moving to Duluth from 1983 to 1986, my wife had some pretty cool adventures. One of my wife's favorite hangouts while living in Duluth was a place called Grandma's Bar and Saloon. Grandma's is a pretty cool place for a couple of reasons. One, it has a balcony overlooking the canal and the bridge, so you can watch ships going in and out while you eat your lunch. The other cool thing about Grandma's is they post the ship's arrivals and departures, so you can kind of keep track and watch the time so you can catch a ship coming in and out of the harbor.
There is known as the captain's salute. It's one long honk of the horn followed by 2 short ones. It's the most standard greeting that we hear here at the canal between the ships and the bridge. Once again, Indiana Harbor, 1,000 feet long. If you see any crew members on deck, give them a big old wave and welcome them back to Duluth, Minnesota.
This concludes episode 4 of the Postcard Pilgrim, The Bridge. Join us again next time when we stay in Duluth and discover the North Pier Lighthouse. Take care and God bless. Until next time.